January 1944. High above western Germany, the air is thin enough to burn the lungs. Contrails carve white scars across a pale winter sky. At 25,000 feet, a formation of American bombers presses forward, slow, deliberate, exposed. Off to one side, a single escort fighter breaks formation. It is enormous by fighter standards. Thick-winged, barrel-chested. Its radial engine hums steadily, almost indifferently. German pilots have seen this aircraft before. They have joked about it in briefings. Too heavy. Too slow. A flying target. Then it rolls inverted. The nose drops. Gravity takes hold. The aircraft does not fall apart. It accelerates. The airframe holds as the needle sweeps past numbers few pilots expect to see. Control surfaces stiffen. The horizon blurs. At more than 500 miles per hour, the fighter becomes something else entirely. Untouchable, unstoppable, governed less by dogfighting instinct than by physics itself. From above, German pilots try to follow. Their engines scream. Their aircraft shudder. The gap widens instead of closing. Laughter fades into disbelief. Because this moment did not begin in the dive. It began years earlier, in design offices, doctrine debates, and a war that demanded something no one thought this aircraft could be. By the time American escort fighters reached the skies over Germany in force, the air war had already claimed its shape and its casualties. In early 1942, the United States Army Air Forces committed itself to a belief few nations shared: daylight precision bombing, unescorted if necessary. The doctrine promised decisive results. Factories destroyed, oil production halted, the enemy broken by accuracy rather than area devastation. On paper, it was clean. In the sky, it was merciless. The bomber formations moved slowly. B-17. Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators climbed into predictable altitudes and held tight boxes for mutual defense. Their defensive guns were formidable, but only within limits. Against coordinated fighter attacks, even dense formations bled. German fighter units understood this quickly. The Luftwaffe had built its doctrine around interception, altitude advantage, and disciplined attacks. By 1942, Messerschmitt Bf-29s and Focke-Wulf W-190s were waiting above bomber streams, conserving fuel, watching contrails form like invitations. The Americans lacked something critical: reach. Early escort fighters, the P-47, Thunderbolt, P-38, Lightning, and P-40 Warhawk, could not remain with the bombers to their deepest targets. Fuel constraints forced them to turn back. The bombers flew on alone, directly into the teeth of German air defenses. The losses were immediate and severe. Schweinfurt, Regensburg, Bremen. Mission reports listed aircraft destroyed, crews missing, formations shattered before reaching targets. On October 14, 1943, later called Black Thursday, 60 B-17s failed to return from Schweinfurt. Nearly 600 airmen were lost in a single day. It was not a surprise. It was arithmetic. German pilots entered these battles confident, methodical, and aggressive. They had experience. Many were veterans of France, Britain, and the Eastern Front. Their aircraft climbed faster, turned tighter, and felt lighter on the controls. Against lumbering bombers and escorts that could not stay, the advantage felt permanent. At altitude, speed mattered. Climb rate mattered. Turn radius mattered. Weight was a liability. So when German pilots encountered the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, their judgment came quickly. It was massive. Nearly twice the weight of a Bf-109 when fully fueled. Its broad wings and thick fuselage made it impossible to miss. To experienced Luftwaffe eyes, it looked like an escort forced into the wrong role. Too slow to dogfight, too heavy to chase, too blunt to survive prolonged engagement. The jokes spread easily. The Thunderbolt was called clumsy, overbuilt. An aircraft designed by engineers who did not understand air combat. In the calculus of European skies, it appeared to be a mistake. But those assessments were made while watching the aircraft fly level. They did not yet understand what the Americans had built for the vertical. Because while German pilots measured fighters by turn performance and climb, the U.S. Army Air Forces were beginning to think in terms of energy, altitude, speed, and momentum conserved across vast distances. And that difference in thinking would soon collide with gravity itself. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt did not emerge by accident. It was a product of necessity, engineering ambition, and a uniquely American approach to air combat. Designers at Republic Aviation had one objective: create an escort fighter capable of protecting bombers deep into Europe while surviving the firepower the Luftwaffe could unleash at every turn. The result was massive. The Thunderbolt's airframe was steel and aluminum, nearly twice the weight of a Messerschmitt Bf-29 when fully loaded. Its wings were broad, its fuselage thick, and its radial engine, a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp, delivered over 2,000 horsepower. Turbo supercharging allowed it to climb to altitudes approaching 30,000 feet, while keeping power available for a dive no conventional fighter could survive. Engineers designed it to absorb punishment. .50 caliber shells might punch holes, but the airframe held, the pilot could endure, and the aircraft could fight on. Yet appearances deceived. German pilots, seeing the P-47 at first, concluded it was lumbering. In combat reports and pilot journals, it was called the Jug, a milk bottle, a cumbersome escort that would be easy prey. Its climb rate was respectable, but not revolutionary. Its turn radius was poor compared to nimble 109s and FW-190s. In short, on paper and in a level flight observation, the Luftwaffe believed it laughably inferior. But the P-47 was not designed for level fights. Its true advantage lay in energy tactics, dive speed, momentum retention, and structural resilience. The airframe could convert altitude into acceleration that exceeded 500 miles per hour speeds. German aircraft simply could not match in sustained dives. Pilots who attempted to follow often found their planes vibrating violently, controls stiffening, engines straining, and the pursuit physically impossible. What appeared as a weakness, weight, size, drag, was actually the key to dominance in vertical engagements. The U.S. Army Air Forces had begun adapting doctrine accordingly. Training emphasized boom and zoom attacks, dive from above, strike with energy, and climb back before the enemy could react. Pilots learned to trust velocity and mass, rather than dogfighting skill alone. Commanders watched mission reports and noticed an emerging pattern. The heavier, seemingly awkward aircraft was surviving where lighter fighters could not. It was a quiet revolution, invisible to enemy observers. German pilots laughed because they measured skill in turns and climbs. Americans calculated physics, momentum, and gravity. The irony was nearly perfect. By the time the Luftwaffe realized the Thunderbolt's true potential, hundreds of missions would already have been altered, bomber formations better protected, and confidence replaced with hesitation. This shift in perception, where ridicule turned to disbelief, would manifest first in individual encounters, then in sweeping strategic consequences, forever changing the air war over Europe. For the men who flew the Thunderbolt, the first missions were a lesson in humility and adaptation. Experienced fighter pilots accustomed to nimble, light aircraft found themselves strapped into a machine that behaved differently. It climbed slower, turned wider, and felt almost ponderous on the controls. Initial flights tested patience as much as skill. But then they discovered the P-47's secret: dive speed and energy retention. A veteran pilot would recall pressing the throttle at 25,000 feet, feeling the nose pitch down, and the sky blur into a streak. The aircraft responded obediently. Every mission drilled a single rule into their minds: height was power, speed was survival. Trust in the Thunderbolt grew with each pass over flak-laden Europe, each bombing escort mission, and each encounter with the Luftwaffe. Confidence replaced skepticism, not through bravado, but through repeated, tangible proof. Pilots who had once doubted the jug learned to wield it as a precision instrument, converting its mass into advantage. German fighter pilots evaluated threats with years of combat experience behind them. A fast climb, tight turn, and light airframe defined the standard for a formidable adversary. The Thunderbolt, they assumed, failed all three metrics. Reports from 1943 missions often mention laughter and mockery when a P-47 appeared among bombers. Too slow, too heavy, easy pickings. This misjudgment reflected the Luftwaffe's doctrine. Pilots were trained to engage aircraft they could outmaneuver, applying speed and altitude to control the fight. When confronted with the P-47 in level flight, their assumptions appeared validated. But by underestimating dive potential and energy tactics, German pilots placed themselves in situations where neither turn rate nor climb could compensate. The jug would exploit these very miscalculations, turning ridicule into lethal reality. The P-47's engineering was revolutionary in ways many observers missed. Its turbo supercharger allowed it to maintain full power at extreme altitudes, something nearly all contemporary fighters struggled with. Combined with a durable, overbuilt airframe, the aircraft could dive from 25,000 feet and exceed 500 miles per hour without structural failure, a remarkable achievement for the era. Unlike lighter fighters, which risked compressibility effects and control stiffening in high-speed dives, the Thunderbolt remained manageable. Pilots could convert altitude into kinetic energy repeatedly, striking, climbing, and striking again. This was not a trick. It was physics applied to combat. German pilots, trained for maneuver warfare, were unprepared for a plane that defied their experiential logic. The convergence of human adaptation, enemy miscalculation, and technological innovation set the stage for a confrontation that would redefine air combat in Europe. The P-47 forced a rethinking of tactics. American pilots learned to abandon the traditional dogfight. Instead, they relied on boom and zoom, dive from above with guns blazing, then climb back to altitude before the enemy could counterattack. The combination of altitude advantage, dive speed, and resilient structure made the tactic devastatingly effective. In practice, the Thunderbolt's pilots would enter a combat zone above the Luftwaffe, selecting targets, Bf-1009s or FW-90s, calculating the precise moment to release energy into the attack. The dive transformed a cumbersome aircraft into a streak of steel and fire. Enemy pilots attempting to follow found their machines rattling under stress, controls stiffening, and engines straining to match the speed. In every successful engagement, the P-47 demonstrated that raw momentum could outweigh agility. Commanders observed early missions with cautious optimism. They recognized the aircraft's potential, but also understood the need for new procedures and training. Squadrons emphasized altitude discipline, energy conservation, and coordinated dive attacks. Leaders enforced strict adherence to formation integrity while allowing individual pilots the latitude to exploit dive speed. This balance between structure and initiative created a force capable of protecting bombers across hostile territory. Leadership decisions translated directly into mission survivability, with Thunderbolts not only escorting bombers, but increasingly dictating the terms of engagement. German pilots found themselves reacting rather than initiating, a psychological shift that would resonate through Luftwaffe reports. For American pilots, the P-47 was less about heroics and more about survival. The aircraft demanded respect and patience. Success in combat did not come from flashy maneuvers, but from trusting the physics of the machine. Pilots learned to restrain instinctual reactions, to avoid turning engagements, and to preserve energy for decisive strikes. The moral lesson was profound. Victory often favored those who understood their tools, respected natural laws, and exercised restraint. The P-47 transformed pilot psychology, turning initial skepticism into quiet confidence. By the time the Thunderbolt proved its value to the Luftwaffe, the human element, discipline, adaptability, and trust in engineering was already reshaping the air war over Europe. These angles, tactical, leadership, and moral, were now coalescing in combat. The next stage would show this understanding meeting reality in the sky, encounters that would define the turning point of the P-47's reputation. Formations. B-17s and B-24s lumbered toward industrial targets deep in the Reich, their defensive guns scanning for threats. Above them, the 56th Fighter Group's P-47s climbed steadily, engines whining, ready to intercept. The Luftwaffe was waiting. Jagdgeschwader units positioned themselves at 24,000 feet, confident. Veteran pilots of Bf-109s and Vu-190s had seen these jugs before. Their reports were dismissive, slow, overweight, and easy prey. Yet, beneath their confidence, a subtle unease was already forming. At 25,000 feet, a Thunderbolt pilot released formation and rolled into a dive. Gravity accelerated the massive aircraft faster than any Bf-1009 could sustain. Instruments screamed past 500 mph. The airframe, built like a fortress, vibrated but held. The pilot aimed carefully and fired. Enemy aircraft were torn apart or scattered. German pilots attempted to follow, but their lighter fighters could not maintain control. The P-47's dive exceeded their structural and aerodynamic limits. In several minutes, what began as a routine engagement turned into a catastrophe for the Luftwaffe. Reports later noted FW-90s overstressed, Bf-29s fleeing, and pilots forced into panic maneuvers. Above all, the bomber formations survived with fewer losses than predicted. Mission after mission, the Thunderbolt proved the theory, mass, speed, and altitude, when used together, could overcome even the most agile enemy. Commanders watching from control posts began to realize the aircraft had transformed the calculus of air combat. Yet, this was only the opening of a broader confrontation. More encounters were approaching. More dives, more disbelief, and more irreversible changes in Luftwaffe tactics loomed on the horizon. By mid-1944, the P-47 had become a force the Luftwaffe could no longer ignore. Missions over Germany and France revealed a consistent pattern. German pilots who once laughed at the Thunderbolt now found themselves struggling to cope. On June 6, 1944, during the Allied invasion of Normandy, P-47s flew escort missions and ground attack sorties in large numbers. High above, the Luftwaffe scrambled to intercept. Fu-90s and Bf-10-9s attempted to dive after the Thunderbolts, expecting to engage them as they had every other fighter. But the P-47s, diving from superior altitude, simply outran pursuit. Control surfaces stiffened, engines strained, and enemy formations fractured under the stress of speed and firepower. Combat reports from both sides began to tell the same story. One German pilot noted in his journal, "The jug descends like a hammer. We cannot follow. Our wings shake. Our aircraft groan." American pilots, once skeptical, now embraced the dive with precision. They struck decisively and returned to altitude, only to repeat the tactic again. The impact on Luftwaffe strategy was immediate. Pilots hesitated to engage. Thunderbolts. Formations became more defensive, and interception timing grew cautious. Tactical manuals were revised in secret, acknowledging a threat previously dismissed. The psychological effect was profound. Laughter had turned to wariness, skepticism into fear, and mockery into grudging respect. By the summer of 1944, the Thunderbolt's dominance in vertical engagements was undeniable. Its reputation soared, yet so did the cost. Missions were perilous, and pilots continually risked flak, mechanical failure, and human error. Still, the P-47 had rewritten the rules of air combat over Europe. The turning point was complete. The enemy had learned a lesson in physics, engineering, and human adaptability. Now the aftermath of this lesson. The real consequences in lives, strategy, and air superiority would unfold in stark clarity. The skies over Europe were quieter in some ways, yet the cost of achieving that quiet was steep. P-47 missions had reduced bomber losses, but at what expense? Each sortie demanded precision, discipline, and trust in a machine that could both save and betray its pilot, depending on timing and altitude. Ground crews and commanders took note. Thunderbolts, with their robust construction, returned from missions riddled with flak holes, yet capable of another sortie. German aircraft, in contrast, bore the visible scars of overextended dives, structural stress, and forced evasions. Pilots who once relied on maneuverability found their formations hesitant, their engagements cautious, their confidence eroded by machines they had misjudged. For the American pilots, the P-47 was no longer an object of skepticism, but a tool of survival and tactical dominance. Boom and zoom became doctrine. Altitude, speed, and structural resilience became critical metrics in training. Survival rates improved, bomber losses decreased, and morale climbed. The air war was shifting, subtly but irrevocably. Yet, this transformation was not merely technological. human psychology had adapted alongside the aircraft. Pilots learned patience, discipline, and the profound lesson that raw instinct often had to yield to calculation. Each mission etched new patterns of thinking into their minds: anticipate enemy limitations, respect your machine, and exploit physics over bravado. These changes would ripple through the remainder of the air war. The P-47, once dismissed as slow and unwieldy, had rewritten the rules of engagement, altering strategies, doctrines, and perceptions alike. But the story was not finished. The broader consequences, on both sides of the conflict, would soon emerge, revealing shifts in strategy, losses, and the future trajectory of aerial warfare. The emergence of the P-47 as a dominant escort and strike fighter reshaped the air war over Europe. For the USAAF, bomber formations could penetrate deeper into the Reich with greater protection. Daylight raids, once perilous exercises in attrition, became increasingly effective. Reports from missions over industrial centers, Dresden, Berlin, Leipzig, showed fewer losses among American crews, validating the combination of Thunderbolt escorts and tactical adaptation. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, faced a crisis of confidence. Pilots who had trained for maneuver-based engagements struggled to adapt to aircraft that operated outside conventional combat paradigms. Units previously aggressive and decisive grew cautious. Interception timing shifted, air superiority at altitude eroded, and losses mounted not solely due to numerical inferiority, but because doctrine had not accounted for dive-dominant opponents. Some German reports explicitly noted the Jug's destructive energy tactics as a game-changer, a rare admission from seasoned combat veterans. Strategically, the P-47's role extended beyond escort duties. Its rugged construction allowed it to perform ground attack missions, strafing enemy supply lines, railways, and armored formations. The combination of air-to-air superiority and ground attack capability made it a versatile weapon, capable of shaping battles on multiple fronts. The German army, already stretched thin, now faced aerial pressure on both tactical and operational levels. Despite the Thunderbolt's later overshadowing by the longer-range P-51 Mustang, its contribution remained decisive. It had demonstrated that engineering intelligence, coupled with tactical innovation, could overcome prejudice and doctrinal rigidity. For American pilots, each mission reinforced lessons in discipline, adaptation, and respect for machine and physics alike. For the Luftwaffe, each encounter reinforced the consequences of underestimation. The P-47 had not only survived ridicule, it had transformed it into a tactical advantage, leaving a legacy that would influence air combat doctrine for decades. Its triumph over the skies of Europe was complete, yet the war's final stages would continue to test every lesson learned. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt is a story of expectations overturned. German pilots laughed because they judged by appearances, by lightness, agility, and instinct honed in years of experience. The Americans succeeded because they trusted physics, discipline, and engineering. In the harsh expanse of European skies, size and weight became advantages, speed and momentum became weapons, and pilots learned that survival required patience as much as courage. The Thunderbolt teaches a broader truth. Technology alone does not win wars, but it can amplify human decision-making when combined with adaptability. A machine dismissed for its bulk became an instrument of precision, resilience, and psychological dominance. Pilots' trust in their aircraft turned skepticism into confidence, and repeated encounters forced even seasoned adversaries to recalibrate their assumptions. In the end, The dive that surpassed 500 miles per hour was more than a maneuver. It was a demonstration of planning meeting opportunity, design meeting doctrine, and physics rewriting conventional wisdom. The P-47 did not merely protect bombers, it reshaped the air war over Europe, proving that underestimation can be fatal, and that mastery of one's tools is as vital as mastery of one's instincts. Above all, the jug leaves a lasting legacy, a testament to human ingenuity, a reminder that appearances deceive, and an enduring example of how courage, engineering, and discipline converge to rewrite the rules of combat.